Hey, stuffers. If your cardio routine involves collapsing from exhaustion in the street, you might be in the wrong century. Alex here, and welcome back to Stuff with Alex. Stop whatever you're doing and listen to this, because this isn't fiction. This is a documented, terrifying history. In the summer of 1518, in a busy city called Strasbourg, a woman stepped out onto the cobblestones, and she started to dance. That's it. No party, no celebration, no TikTok challenge. She just started moving, and she didn't stop for a week. What happened next reads like a horror movie written by a very confused choreographer. Within days, dozens joined her. By the time August rolled around, over 400 people were caught in this rhythmic, inescapable frenzy, unable to stop their bodies from jerking and swaying. And here is the shocking, jaw-dropping detail. Dozens of people died. Not from a pathogen, not from violence, but from sheer physical exhaustion, strokes, and heart attacks, all because they danced themselves to death. This isn't just a weird historical footnote, stuffers. This is a mass casualty event caused by rhythm. And the local government's response? They saw the crisis, correctly identified that the dancers were suffering from hot blood, their actual medical term, bless their hearts, and decided the only logical solution was to bring in a full brass band, build stages, and encourage them to dance it out. Yes, they tried to dance the plague out of existence. Buckle up, because this historical blunder makes the Titanic's navigation look like Nobel Prize work. Let's set the scene. Strasbourg, 1518. It's hot, miserable, and people are hanging on by a thread. We'll get into the specifics of why later. But just know that if this time period were a mood board, it would be labeled existential dread. This whole bizarre, deadly phenomenon starts, as all great historical mysteries do, with a single, deeply confused individual. We know her name, Frau Troffea. On July 14th, she stepped out of her half-timbered home onto the narrow, cobbled street and simply began to dance. Witnesses later recounted that she had no musical accompaniment, no fiddler, no drum circle, nothing. Just her dancing fervently and uncontrollably. Hours passed. She did not stop. She kept up this constant, involuntary motion for an entire week. When historians look back at this moment, they don't see a random outburst. They see the initial crack in a massive, fragile psychological dam. Frau Troffea's isolated, bizarre act served as the powerful psychological trigger for hundreds of others who were already under immense, unbearable stress. The way this happened is known to medical history as a nocebo effect. We've all heard of the placebo effect, where believing a medicine works helps you heal. The nocebo effect is the dark mirror of that. Believing you are going to be ill or compelled or cursed can actually manifest real, debilitating physical symptoms. Troffea kept moving with vacant expressions, clearly in distress, screaming as she danced, pleading for help, but unable to quit. This is critical. She wasn't enjoying herself. This wasn't a medieval rave. This suggests the compulsion was terrifying and agonizing, making her a victim of her own body's catastrophic internal failure. She was patient zero, not of a virus, but of a collective psychological meltdown, demonstrating the frightening power of the mind to convert absolute terror into literal, self-destructive physical motion. The initial isolation of Frau Troffea was short-lived. Like a single match dropped into a barrel of gunpowder, the spread was instantaneous and horrifying. Within days, 36 other townsfolk, including a woman named Fraulein Emma Gutz, had joined her, moving with the same compelled, frenetic motion. This rapid escalation moves the event from strange local incident to mass epidemic. The rate of growth from 1 person in early July to up to 400 people by August is inconsistent with the traditional infectious disease models of the time, but it perfectly aligns with highly suggestible psychological phenomena like mass panic and collective hysteria. It shows that the societal stressors we'll detail later had created such a volatile, suggestible environment that the trigger simply needed to be visible to propagate immediately. Imagine the city square. It was transformed into a surreal stage of constant, desperate movement. Men and women twirled, collapsed from exhaustion, and then, if they survived the fall, staggered back up, caught in the irresistible urge to dance once more. These choreomaniacs were so monomaniac in motion that it was believed only death would have the power to intervene. If you saw this happening in your neighborhood, would you run away or would you grab your phone and start filming? Here is the thing that solidifies this as one of history's great mysteries. This isn't some obscure folktale whispered by a guy named Bartholomew in the pub. This is a verifiable historical event meticulously documented. The story was independently described by scores of physicians, chroniclers, monks, and priests. We even possess the official, panicky municipal orders written by the Strasbourg authorities at the time of the epidemic. This historical weight adds a layer of disturbing gravitas to an otherwise absurd story, forcing us to ask, how could the human body betray itself on this scale? Now we move to the official response, which is arguably the most facepalm-inducing political decision in Western history. The city's leaders were completely stumped. This was a crisis with no precedent. The dancers weren't injured or bleeding. They were just aggressively exercising themselves to oblivion. The authorities believed the cause was a medical condition they dubbed hot blood, or possibly a form of divine punishment. Their conclusion, based on medieval medical theory, the feverish compulsion must be allowed to burn itself away. They thought the cure was to keep dancing. Think about that for a second. Imagine calling the fire department because your house is burning, and they show up, look at the flames, and say, you know what, this fire needs some jazz music. That was basically the 1518 Strasbourg City Council. They took a deadly compulsion and gave it a sound system. The municipal orders were enacted. Stages were built, professional musicians, pipers, drums, and horns were hired, and the afflicted were actively encouraged to continue dancing. This decision, which sounds utterly insane to modern ears, was rooted in the prevailing superstitious 16th century worldview. They thought they were applying a logical, albeit brutal, medical treatment. The administration, in their infinite wisdom, unintentionally validated the act as a legitimate, if terrible, medical response. By organizing the dancing, they reinforced the belief that this was the required course of action, which tragically deepened the collective trance and escalated the nocebo effect. This validation led to a horrific feedback loop. Instead of subsiding, the frenzy only grew worse. The city square, meant to be a place of commerce and civic order, became a morbid, round-the-clock dance floor, backed by the macabre rhythm of the city's hired entertainers. The governing body had, through pure, unadulterated administrative incompetence, transformed a localized psychological breakdown into a citywide death trap. Did their grand plan save the day, or did it turn the city square into the most metal, unintended outdoor funeral in history? We'll find out right after this mini-break. The consequences of the mayor's magnificent blunder were swift and gruesome. While the city council was busy auditioning pipers, the dancers, unable to stop, were paying the ultimate price. These people were dancing for days on end, without sleep, food, or water. Their bodies, under intense, ceaseless strain, began to fail dramatically. Chroniclers confirmed that some dancers collapsed from pure exhaustion, others suffered broken bones from uncontrolled falls or muscle spasms. But the truly tragic detail is the reports of cardiovascular failure. Victims were dropping dead from heart attacks and strokes, their bodies shutting down from the continuous physiological strain. While there is some historical controversy concerning the precise number of deaths, multiple contemporary accounts suggest that at the peak of the outbreak in August, dozens of people were dying daily. Whether the death toll was 100 or 400, the fact remains that a human body was compelled by an invisible force to move itself until fatal systems failure. This is the disturbing core of the mystery. This event provides concrete evidence of psychosomatic death in action. For a modern audience, the idea that psychological distress could lead directly to fatal heart attacks or strokes is hard to comprehend. But this historical snapshot shows the extreme, prolonged physiological reaction caused by overwhelming mental stress. If you're already losing sleep over this, drop your wildest theory in the comments. Were they possessed, poisoned, or just really stressed out? The mania lasted for about 2 months before it ended as mysteriously as it began. So, the world was left with this chilling historical puzzle. What made 400 people dance until they died? Historians have 2 main competing theories, and we have to break them down one by one because they determine whether 1518 was a medical mystery or a psychological thriller. For a long time, the most appealing and certainly the simplest explanation for the dancing plague was biological. It's the theory that satisfies our modern need for a clear scientific cause: food poisoning. The theory posits that the dancers consumed rye grain contaminated with ergot. Ergot is a fungus that grows on damp rye, and it contains potent hallucinogenic alkaloids. If that sounds familiar, it should. Ergot is the same substance from which LSD was later derived. So was medieval Strasbourg just one giant accidental citywide acid trip that lasted for 2 months? This condition, known as ergotism, or sometimes St. Anthony's fire, was recognized in the Middle Ages. It causes nasty symptoms: convulsions, twitching, muscle spasms, hallucinations, and bizarre erratic behavior. It sounds like the perfect conspiracy theory starter pack, right? A mind-altering substance found in the basic food source causing mass spasms. It gives us a clear answer, which is why the ergotism theory has persisted through the centuries. It provides a simple, quantifiable biological cause for a bizarre behavioral phenomenon, fitting neatly into the historical context where food contamination was common. However, in any good deep dive, when the explanation is too simple, you have to look for the fine print. And in the fine print of the ergotism theory, you find some major plot holes, largely thanks to modern historical and medical analysis. The scientific debunking of the ergotism theory is the pivot point of our story. It forces us to abandon the cozy safety of biology and venture into the terrifying landscape of mass psychology. The man who most effectively dismantled the ergotism theory is the American medical historian John Waller. Waller's analysis transformed the mystery from "what could it be" to "what must it be?" Here is the essential counterargument. While ergotism poisoning does cause twitching and spasms, it also brings along debilitating, excruciating pain, so painful, in fact, that sustained continuous movement is virtually impossible. The documented symptoms of the Strasbourg dancers consistently describe continuous rhythmic motion, feverish dancing leading to exhaustion, strokes, and heart failure. They were moving compulsively for weeks, not seizing painfully on the ground and losing motor control, which are the hallmarks of ergotism. Furthermore, ergotism can cause gangrene, and those symptoms are largely absent from the 1518 chronicles. The mechanism of action in biological theory simply does not match the observed effects of the plague. The persistence and intensity of the dance, lasting for 2 months, strongly argue against a temporary hallucinogenic or neurological poisoning. This scientific elimination is crucial. If it wasn't a biological agent, if the food was safe, then what kind of pressure cooker was the human mind creating in 1518 Strasbourg? The conclusion must be psychological. The answer lies not in moldy bread, but in absolute, soul-crushing despair. We now arrive at the definitive explanation favored by John Waller and the majority of medical historians. The dancing plague of 1518 was a severe case of mass psychogenic disorder, or MPI. MPI is basically when your brain decides it's so done with reality that it just downloads its stress directly into your physical body. It's the ultimate full-body anxiety attack, where collective stress is converted into shared physical symptoms, even death. This level of psychological breakdown requires a perfect storm of overwhelming stressors. And 1518 Strasbourg was less of a city and more of an open-air psychological tinderbox. The decade leading up to the plague had been one of widespread despair. Strasbourg was facing a series of brutal famines and a terrifying cold. Bread prices had reached their highest levels in a generation. Thousands of starving farmers and vine growers were streaming into the city, creating crushing poverty and political instability. If poverty and starvation weren't enough, the city was also ravaged by disease. Old killers like leprosy and the bubonic plague were compounded by the terrifying new affliction of syphilis. This confluence of economic disaster, physical threat, and constant pervasive fear created an extreme environment of existential dread. The dancing plague was not the crisis itself. It was a devastating symptom of a city already on the psychological brink. The crucial observation here is that the compulsion allowed individuals to convert overwhelming, incomprehensible anxiety, the fear of starvation, the certainty of death, into a physical, visible, and temporarily localized ritual. It was a perverse form of coping, a way for their deep fear to finally express itself, proving the unbearable internal trauma was real. Waller maintains that these outbreaks take a form based on local cultural fears. So, why dancing? Why not mass screaming or flocking like birds, as happened in other historical hysteria events? We need the final piece of the puzzle, the cultural script. The mind, under extreme stress, needs a script. It needs a template for how to behave when it breaks. And Strasbourg had the perfect template waiting in their folklore: the cult and curse of Saint Vitus. Saint Vitus was the patron saint of dancers and also of epileptics. There was a powerful, locally held belief that those who failed to properly propitiate or appease Saint Vitus would be cursed by being forced to dance uncontrollably. Imagine the scene. You're starving, your child is sick, and every day brings new horror. Then your neighbor, Frau Troffea, begins dancing, a behavior you recognize instantly from local lore as the punishment of Saint Vitus. In that moment of extreme suggestibility, fueled by the nocebo effect, your brain uses the only cultural explanation it has for this specific type of physical breakdown. You believe you are cursed, and therefore you become cursed. The minds of the choreomaniacs were literally drawn inwards, according to historian accounts, tossed about on the violent seas of their deepest fears. This localized religious fear provided the specific cultural mechanism for the MPI, explaining why the Strasbourg outbreak took the specific form of dancing, unlike other mass hysteria events which involved animalistic fits. It was the meeting point of deep psychological despair and highly specific cultural lore. This principle is still relevant today, stuffers. The underlying cause of modern mass hysteria, stress, social pressure, fear, is universal. But the form of our psychological breakdowns, whether it's dancing until you die in 1518 or an outbreak of phantom illness in a modern workplace, is dictated by our prevailing cultural anxieties and the templates we believe are real. The dancing plague of 1518 remains one of the most perplexing moments in world history, a reminder of how collective fear and social pressures can manifest in bizarre and devastating ways. It shows the horrifying power of the human mind, which, when pushed to the absolute breaking point by famine, disease, and the constant fear of the unknown, found a terrible physical release mechanism dictated by local superstition. The great takeaway here is not just that people dance themselves to death, but that the burdens of the world, the unseen stressors, the existential anxiety, have a physical weight that can crush us if we carry them alone. We see the lesson of Strasbourg 1518, that even when we feel like our bodies are failing us, or that the weight of the world is too heavy, we must remember that true endurance comes from an inner source, an unseen hope that allows us to stand firm. The story of the dancing plague is a haunting reminder of the immense pressure and unseen battles we wage inside ourselves, and how easily fear can take a physical toll. Even when we feel like we're wasting away outwardly, whether through physical duress or overwhelming anxiety, there is an inner strength, a hope, that allows us to renew ourselves day by day, finding peace not in the temporary chaos we see, but in the unseen hope that sustains us. The Apostle Paul wrote something that speaks to the resilience needed in times of overwhelming, unseen struggle like the citizens of 1518 Strasbourg faced. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16. Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. This message is a quiet assurance that no matter how dark our surroundings look, we are not alone in our struggle, and the future brings a better reality. Okay, thanks for watching. Peace out. Goodbye, guys.